All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tina Bovey. I'm sitting here in the fur vault of 757's space at the Assembly Building in downtown Norfolk. As you can see, we've got a group of us here in person, and obviously we have a group of you online, so thank you for joining us virtually. I am excited to have Sarah Pavlard here to talk to us about AUKUS, about doing business with Australians. I think it's going to be a really great tech talk for us. And I ask that everyone stay on mute. If you have questions throughout, you can type them into chat and we'll get to them at the end. We'll also open it up at the end for Q&A. And we have allotted an hour and a half for this, so we should have plenty of time to get to your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Julie Stark to introduce the Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge, who is a host for this Tech Talk. Julie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up in the room, please. Excellent. Thank you for that. So hello, I'm Julie Stark, as I said, from the Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge. There's three directors. They're on the screen there. So Gerald, Joanne, and I all work together as part of the Naval X Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge team. Just real quick about the organization. So there's 18 tech bridges throughout the world, and our job is to work as a super connector to help organizations that might not know how to work with the government, in particular the Department of the Navy and Marine Corps, but we really want to encourage industry partners to work with anybody in the government. So we have a number of events like this excellent tech talk today that we host throughout the year. We encourage you to link up with us on LinkedIn, and any company is also able to sync up with us to attend events or even have direct meetings with us. So without any additional further delay, I will go ahead and turn it back. Thank you to 757 Collab, our PIA partner, for helping us host this and many other events. And go ahead and welcome today Sarah, that'll be talking about how we can do business with Australia. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Julie. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to introduce 757 Collab.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe D'Amelio. I work with 757 Collab, and we are the PIA partner for the Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge. As you can see on the slide, we've got four main verticals that fall underneath the umbrella, which is 757 Collab, and that includes the 757 Startup Studios, which is an incubator type program that runs 2 different cohorts a year. Each cohort runs for 6 months. We give about 30 founders in each cohort 6 months of co-working space, along with programming to help them get their idea from ideation to a minimum viable product. Next up is the 757 Accelerate program. That is a much more intensive program targeted at companies that are looking to expand and or exit in the near future. And that is a 10-week program. We normally have about 250 applicants, 10 are selected of the 250, and then they get some customized programming over those 10 weeks, as well as $20,000 of non-dilutive capital. The third up is the 757 Angels, powered by Venture South. They're the third largest angel group in the country due to the partnership with Venture South. And they focus on investing locally here in businesses based out of the 757. Lastly, there's a 757 Collab fee-for-service or innovation partnerships vertical, and that's where we offer customized programming to community partners to meet whatever needs they may have. So we've done some work for the Hampton Roads Biomedical Research Consortium, as well as Rise Resilience, who is hosting some environmental challenges. And again, we help foster the relationship with the Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge and industry. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Joe. All right, and with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks so much. I'll just give you a presentation. Great. Fantastic. Success. Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for having me here to share my thoughts about Beyond AUKUS, doing business with Australians. It's a real honour and privilege to have the opportunity to really take another little small step to advance the broader agenda with respect to this catalysing program. So I'll get started. Last year, Tina and I actually met when I launched a white paper at CES Space here in the US, Micro Partnerships in the Age of AUKUS, and was really thinking through the challenge of AUKUS, but also the great potential. And so this quote, whilst Alfred K. Mahan saw it in the context of securing American sea lines of communication and maritime power, now we are collectively in a situation where the geopolitical challenge demands us to be able to co-work and collaborate and really co-deliver a trilateral industrial base together. And so I really see that although the meaning is nuanced, Mahan's quote is still so relevant today. So I'll get started with what I'll be covering off on in this talk today. So the first is I'll cover a little bit of Australian Defence Policy 101. And the reason that I'm covering that is because it has really been enormously shaped by AUKUS, and we've been going through a whole of defence transformation to deliver not just on AUKUS, but a couple of other key initiatives for the Australian defence sector. Then I'll drill it down into a little bit of AUKUS 101 regarding both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, nuclear-powered submarines and advanced technologies and information sharing. I also just want to share a few of my thoughts regarding the enabling legislation, both from the Australian side as well as some really critical milestones with respect to the changes or the exemptions, the AUKUS exemptions that are about to go through a review period through Congress. Beyond AUKUS, the scope of the opportunity, and a little bit of so what for American defence sector businesses. I'm orienting a little bit more to naval businesses, recognising the audience and the location today. And on that point, delivering not just on the promise of AUKUS, but seeing what might lie beyond AUKUS in terms of Australian and American collaboration. So, Australian Defence Policy 101. This picture is really important. It's from a key paper that was delivered last year, the Defence Strategic Review. And this rendition of Australia in Southeast Asia was one of the capstone framing reference points. And the star that I've put on that map is where Perth is located. And whilst in some instances AUKUS is being framed as just about Australia acquiring nuclear-powered submarines and being able to operate them and doing that with the technology transfer from the US and the UK, the reality is that it extends far beyond that. Australia is geostrategically very, very important in the Indo-Pacific, but also to the United States. And one of the key elements of AUKUS is establishing a maintenance facility and a rotational force for a Virginia squadron from Perth. And its proximity to the regions of interest in the South China Sea shouldn't be underestimated. So I'll just go over a little bit about some Australian defence policy and almost how we got to where we are today talking about AUKUS. So in 2020, our previous government, and so for those who are less skilled in Australian politics, our Liberal government is more right-leaning. Our Labor government, which is the current government of the day, is more left-leaning. Our previous government, after a series of white papers which lay out defence strategy, provided a defence strategic update in 2020. And in that update, there were two significant elements. It called out that Australia has lost a 10-year warning time for any potential conflict ahead of us. And without specifically talking about China, the frame of reference was, of course, China. And that laid out a restructure of the defence budgets and investments. At that time, Australia was on track to acquire the French attack class submarine, and the project had been in play for some time. Then in September 2021 was the extraordinary announcement about AUKUS, with 3 heads of state coming together despite COVID to share what I think was one of the best kept secrets, certainly in Australian history and you know, maybe for America as well. 18 months later, we then are in a situation where Australia has a new government, you know, so we've had a change of government at all key levels of, you know, federal politics. And one of the key promises of our government was to issue a defence strategic review. So they wanted, having not been in power for 10 years, they wanted to understand whether or not the defence strategy was fit for purpose for the future ahead, and whether or not it had our current strategic thinking was properly encapsulating that by this time we were on track to acquire nuclear powered submarines. In between those points, we also had the announcements around what AUKUS Pillar 1 and AUKUS Pillar 2 would contain, and I'll come to that. Fast forward, our National Defence, Defence Strategic Review was released, National Defence, and it's laid out key priorities. Having said that, there was still some work to be done, and we're only getting to the point now where most of the key elements for moving the defence capability forward from an Australian context are in place. So one of the core recommendations out of our Defence Strategic Review was to undertake a review of the Navy's surface combatant fleet. It's called the Enhanced Lethality Surface Combatant Fleet Review. And the question that was being asked is the Navy's structure with respect to its surface combatants fit for what the Defence Strategic Review called out, but also for the fact that Australia was now on track to acquire nuclear powered submarines. So that service combatant review was released in, or the outcomes of it were released in February this year. And about a week later, the next key document, the Defence Industrial Development Strategy, was released. And it's interesting to note that that has come shortly after the release of the US's recent reframing of defence industry policy. Literally 2 days ago, Australian time, the National Defence Strategy was finally released, and alongside it, the purple document on the right, which is what business is particularly interested in, which is the money and what money is going to be allocated to what program. The budgets that are called out in the Integrated Investment Program will be tabled in Parliament on the second Tuesday of May, and that is a critical juncture for Australia's defence sector, because all the transformation that has been envisaged and has commenced is going to be funded as of government passing that after it's tabled in early May. Our budgets work a little bit differently for the US budgets. This is also an election budget for our government. Within the next 12 months, we'll have a federal election as well. And we're expecting a second term of the current government at this point in time. So just those bits of policy are really important to frame the discussion, because one, where policy goes, money flows. And two, it demonstrates that while AUKUS is absolutely front of mind and one of the highest priorities with respect to the National Defence Strategy, there's actually more than meets, you know, we're going beyond AUKUS, and there's significant transformation underway across the whole defence sector and the national security apparatus within Australia. So I was at a roundtable earlier last week with the Minister for Defence Industry, the Australian Minister for Defence Industry, who was in the US for CS Space. And he made the point that the National Defence Strategy outlines how the Australian Defence Force has been transformed and equipped to survive in a much less certain world. But AUKUS, the transition of the Australian Army to a force capable of littoral manoeuvre and effective long-range strike, land and maritime, as well as the transformation of the Royal Australian Navy through not just nuclear-powered submarines, but also the enhanced lethality surface combatant fleet, are the key things that are defining this current government's commitment to national defence. So these are the three top line items. And in a maritime and a naval industry context, each of them touches on capabilities that are probably around the table or online within the audience. This transformation, however, just should not be underestimated, the scale and the breadth that's occurring at the moment. So I'll just shift now to a little bit about AUKUS 101, just the basics as far as AUKUS is concerned. For those who are very AUKUS aware, this probably won't be new news. And just noting that I've seen a few comments come up in the chat. I should have said this at the outset. Please feel free to put questions into the chat as I speak. And you know, we'll definitely take verbal questions, but also Tina can read out any of the questions that come through online. If my Australian accent is a bit dense and you don't understand something, please ask about that as well. All right, so AUKUS 101. So AUKUS, the conversation around AUKUS emanated initially from discussions regarding what was being called at the time in Australia Plan B, an alternative to the attack class conventionally powered submarine acquisition for Australia, and really centred around Australia acquiring nuclear powered submarines in the future. But as the discussion progressed, it became clear that the complexity of enabling that technology transfer and the joint industrial base for creating Australian nuclear powered submarine capability was so complex that neither Australia, the US, nor the UK wanted to go through the same kind of process to have to share other advanced technologies in the future. And so from that came AUKUS Pillar 2, which is focusing on advanced capabilities and some of the very exciting technology innovation that's happening across our defence sectors right now. But it also touches on innovation and information sharing more broadly. So skip to the next one. So if we start with Pillar 1, it's quite comprehensive, the program that's underway. So Australia's committed up to 368 billion Australian dollars, which is a lot less US dollars at this stage than it was this time last year because our dollar's not so great. But it's a big commitment, 268 to 368 billion Australian dollars to be invested between now and 2025. Australia will be acquiring at least 3 and up to 5 Virginia-class submarines from the United States to be delivered early in the 2030s. And I think that's really important to note, that 3 to 5 number, because this point is mitigating risk with the design and construction of the future AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines. Now, it's up to 8 AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines to be built in Adelaide and delivered from the early 2040s, with an American combat system, leveraging Australia's existing knowledge and capability of the systems, already operating today in the Collins-class submarine. To enable all of these activities, there is an extraordinary uplift in skills, sustainment and infrastructure investments. And that's where funding is being allocated right now. And whilst the Australian submarine industrial base requires urgent scale up, so too does the submarine industrial base here in the US. And Australia has already set aside 5 billion Australian dollars to invest in the United States submarine industrial base. And both the NDAA and our legislation is working through how do we actually get that into the US economy to start spending on the SID. So the optimal pathway, I've been at briefings with Vice Admiral Jonathan Mead, who's the Director General of the Australian Submarine Agency, so the head of the submarine community now in Australia. And he's, made it clear that the optimal pathway is just that, the optimal pathway, but it's been given sufficient wriggle room to adapt as Australia proves its capability, or to account for delays for things that we can't plan for. So the first element, which is actually underway now, is sharing embedded personnel and industrial workforce. And many of you here will be aware of some Australian officers who have graduated from the nuclear power school and are now gaining experience in some of the Virginia class submarines. Australia has to develop from scratch a nuclear steward program. And in fact, until last year, it was unlawful to have nuclear power generation in Australia, whether for propulsion or for civil power. Legislation changed that to allow Australia to have nuclear propulsion capabilities. Many pundits, particularly in those who are interested in energy security, see that this is potentially, it's not part of the Navy's program, it's not part of Defence's program, but from a political perspective, it's a potential runway into nuclear power as a, option for Australia in the future. Increasing port visits have already commenced, and the first submarine rotational force West will be based out of or operating from Perth in Australia from 2027. And I just go back to that point that it'll be the only Virginia-class squadron in the Indian Ocean and the only maintenance capability for Virginia-class submarines in the Southern Hemisphere. So its strategic importance, not just to Australia, but to both the US and the UK, is very, very high. And alongside American submariners or submariners will also have British Astute-class submarine rotating through it as well. The shipyard at Osborne in Adelaide needs major modification and design changes to enable the construction of nuclear-powered submarine infrastructure. Again, the scale of the challenge shouldn't be underestimated. We're starting from scratch with the capability. But when the capability is delivered, it's likely that the Australian shipyard will be amongst the most advanced of its kind in the world. And that's exactly the experience that's occurred with the new shipyard, also at Osborne, for building the Hunter-class frigates. In the meantime, our existing submarine capability, the Collins class, needs to undertake a life of type extension and lethality upgrades. And Australia needs to prove it's sovereign ready for the US to agree to transfer the technology and to transfer the submarines at the right time. And then we move into SSN AUKUS. Well, design has commenced, but production from the 2030s onwards, once the shipyard's ready. So that brings me to pillar 2, advanced technologies and information sharing. So this theme, co-development, co-delivery, co-sustainment, is 3 words or three terms that I've heard a lot over the last fortnight. So I'm hearing this from American leadership, British leadership, as well as Australian leadership, that AUKUS isn't just about transferring technology to Australia, but it's about really creating this joint industrial base. So many of you will be aware, but for those who are not, the advanced technologies that are a focus for AUKUS are undersea capabilities, quantum technologies, artificial intelligence and autonomy, advanced cyber, hypersonics and counter-hypersonics, and electronic warfare. And I've highlighted that in orange because that's where we've had a lot of progress. And although the intent was for Australia, the US and the UK to launch a single challenge statement, the same challenge statement has just been released by each country. In the future, as we work through the information sharing and how to co-develop and really co-innovate, and the legislative and the policy frameworks that will allow that, we should be able to have a single statement or a single challenge statement released in the future. The other Beyond the technology, there are two other elements around innovation and information sharing. And the information sharing was this frame of reference that was developed as AUKUS was being ideated to think through how do we not have to work through either ITAR exemptions or just the extraordinary burden of export controls compliance to enable the transfer of the technology to Australia. So AUKUS Pillar 2 ITAR exemptions for Australia and the UK is a critical element alongside Australia and the UK's step up in terms of security and export controls to be match fit to operate alongside the US. However, beyond AUKUS Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, as those frameworks get embedded in, this is, a catalyst or a key enabler for co-working and collaborating on opportunities and needs that sit beyond the technologies defined in AUKUS Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And I think that's one of the most exciting things that one of the most exciting promises of AUKUS is that will allow us to go beyond what AUKUS was intended to capture in the first instance. So this is just a quote from our Prime Minister at the time, Scott Morrison, at the Sydney Dialogue. So this is about less than 2 months after the optimal pathway, the first announcement for AUKUS, when it was originally announced. And I guess the point is that this joint industrial base was envisaged right from the outset. It's not new news. So I'll just touch on critical enablers for legislation and regulations. This is actually a screenshot of the roundtable held with some members of Congress discussing the AUKUS exemptions relating to ITAR ahead of a really key review period that's coming up. So Australia's been progressing enabling legislation at pace in order to enable AUKUS technology to be transferred and that co-working, co-development vision. So alongside the update of the NDAA enabling substantial provisions for Australia's AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine program, Australia has been making amendments to the Defence Trade Controls, and that Act of Parliament was signed into law in March. And it's substantially setting up the controls regarding export and re-export from Australia to meet, as I said, it's not like for like, but it's to be match fit to operate in the AUKUS context. There's also another piece of legislation that's been in progress, which really applies to ex-military people and government officials, safeguarding Australia's Military Secrets Act, which is intended to limit the degree to which Australians can share information with foreign governments. So whether that's for training and beyond what's covered in our Official Secrets Act and managed under the security programs. So in parallel to that, the 2024 NDAA has provided some authorisations and key next steps. So I won't go through those individual elements, but the key point is that this is creating now the framework for Australia, the US and the UK to be able to operate together in a much more joint manner than we have been able to do in the past, despite the fact that for many years now, we've had special treaties enabling the cooperation regarding defence trade. Something I've really learned over the last 10 days since we've been in the US, nearly 2 weeks, is that there's a really critical review period coming up from the start of May. So the AUKUS exemptions and the policy to manage it, so the proposed rules, as well as the excluded technology that will not be subject to the AUKUS exemptions, is going to be shared for review from from the 1st of May. At this stage, the release date is the 1st of May. There's only going to be a 30-day review period. And in addition to some of the other meetings we've undertaken, I met with the key trade controls lead from the Department of State, whose responsibility is the AUKUS remit. And his message to industry, US, British and Australian, was please review, please provide feedback. And for anything that sits in particular on the excluded technologies list, if it's going to be a limit or a limiter to effective co-working, they really want the feedback to understand what needs to be changed. So certainly from an Australian perspective, that message hasn't been fed through, and I'm using every opportunity we can to share that, because it's going to really set the framework for how the processes operate regarding the AUKUS exemptions. So on that note, I might just now move to beyond AUKUS and just talk a little bit more about the scope of the Australian opportunity that's before all of us here today. So as I mentioned right up the front, we've had this major transformation in how defence is operating in Australia. The first key document was released around this time last year and laid out a strategy regarding national defence for Australia. And the purpose that's been laid out is for, to define how Australia will, or how we will defend Australia and our immediate region, how we'll deter through denial any adversaries attempt to project power against Australia through our northern approaches. There's a real recognition of the need to protect Australia's economic connection to our region and the world, linking back to Mahan, contributing with our partners to the collective security of the Indo-Pacific, and contributing with our partners to the maintenance of the global rules-based order. So although we've had these follow-on elements released, these objectives have remained consistent. So then the strategic review laid out what are the immediate priorities for defence to focus on. So priority number one is investing in conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines and having that capability delivered to Australia as fast as possible. Priority two is developing the ADF's long-range strike capability, including manufacturing munitions in Australia. So there's been a lot of work done on technology transfer to enable what we are calling the Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance Enterprise, the GWEO, to manufacture munitions in Australia. And in fact, it's to extend manufacturing, because we already have munitions manufacturing capability, but we certainly have gaps in terms of necessary missile technologies. The third priority is improving defence's ability to operate from Australian northern bases. We need to lift the capacity to rapidly apply disruptive new technologies, and the disruptive technologies that are laid out in our strategic review look remarkably like what's been defined in AUKUS Pillar 2. Like the US and the UK, we've got really serious issues with the growth and retention of highly skilled workforce, both within the military, within government, and across the industrial base writ large. And the final piece is about deepening diplomatic and defence partnerships with key regional partners. And the critical partnership that's laid out is Australia's partnership with the US. So then, building on national defence and the strategic review, this national defence strategy was released just this week. So it expands and provides more detail over and above the strategic review, and the key tenets of it are fundamentally unchanged. However, it also lays out the framework for the integrated investment program, which I'll talk about a little bit more. We are committing now $330 billion in capability programs over the decade, and $765 billion is the total defence budget for Australia. Now, what's important to understand in terms of the funding context is that when our May budget is tabled, the next 4 years of funding will be appropriated at that point in time. So we call that the forward estimates. The forward estimates will be as firm as they can be with approved funding for the next 4 years. A lot more certainty and granularity in the next 12 months, but a commitment to 765 billion Australian dollars over the next decade. So if we're following the money in terms of what's been laid out at a high level in the integrated investment program, we really are, in the Australian context, in the era of maritime. So whilst the other domains, land, cyberspace, enterprise and enabling, are laid out, certainly within enterprise and enabling, cyber, and space, there are key elements that contribute to the maritime programs. So, you know, the total expenditure for maritime and maritime enablers is, we don't know the exact figures yet. That will come through with the budget, but it would be well above 40% of the whole Australian Defence Force budget for the next decade. And then this is just a little bit more detail about the future force that's laid out in that National Defence Strategy and in the Integrated Investment Program. And you'll see particularly undersea warfare is a priority, and that's not just nuclear-powered submarine capabilities. So Australia's been undertaking some developmental programs with extra-large uncrewed underwater vehicles, and the Anduril Ghost Shark, which has been co-developed with Australia, has been unveiled just this week. 16% of the budget shifting into maritime capabilities for sea denial and localised sea control. So that's really this expansion of the surface combatant capability. Strike, cyber, amphibious capable combined arms land system is also really key in the maritime context, as is enhancing the northern infrastructure and guided weapons and explosive ordnance. I just want to touch on the surface combatant fleet because this probably hasn't made news to the same extent to which, you know, AUKUS is, you know, in the mindset now. So Australia's surface combatant fleet is set to double in size, and there have been some significant changes to the program. So the thinking around surface combatants is around tier 1, tier 2 type frigates, or capabilities, I should say. So we currently have our 3 Hobart-class air warfare destroyers. It's the first time we've integrated and operated Aegis, and we've demonstrated cooperative engagement capability with the United States Navy. And that's a program that's very near and dear to the heart of me and my team, because we've been very involved in that for more than a decade now. So we are progressing our baseline 9 upgrade to the Hobart class and the integration of Naval Strike Missile, Tomahawk, and a range of other capabilities over the next 8 years or so. The acquisition of Hunter class anti-submarine warfare frigates has actually been reduced from 9 to 6. However, we are going to be acquiring 6 new large optionally crewed surface vessels, essentially missile barges, to increase Navy's long-range strike capability. And these are going to be co-developed with the United States Navy. I think that this is a really exciting space, and it'll be interesting to see if in the future they will be uncrewed. But I think the wording around optionally crewed is very deliberate. We're also going to speed up the thinking around what the future destroyer class should be. Then with respect to the tier 2 vessels, one of the recommendations that was not taken from the surface combatant fleet review was to extend the life of type of the Anzac class frigates that have been the Royal Australian Navy's workhorses, particularly over the last decade. They are going to now be retired at their planned withdrawal date. So there's going to be no extension to the life. So one of the interesting features is, as we are moving through the decisive decade, our surface combatant capability is actually going to drop before it increases within Australia. So HMAS Anzac, it was just announced, is going to be retired from in mid-May or so. The other exciting news, you know, for someone who's played in the surface combatant space for a while, is that Australia will be acquiring 11 new general purpose frigates, 4 have been identified as candidates and will have a decision made within 12 months, less than 12 months now, as to which one it will be. So the candidates are a Japanese frigate, a Spanish frigate, a German, and a South Korean designs. So there's obviously deep discussions with the Australian government with all the candidate capabilities. In addition to that, one of the key tenets is that the first 3 of these vessels will be acquired off the shelf from a foreign shipyard, from a shipyard that is currently delivering this capability today. And the remainder will be built in Western Australia in the Henderson precinct. So that means we also need a frigate design and build capable steel hull shipyard in Western Australia, in addition to the nuclear-powered submarine infrastructure, sustainment capability, docking facilities, and support to the rotational force. So the need to scale up West Australian capability is urgent, and its complexity reaches far beyond submarine capability. In addition, in Western Australia, Austal, the Austal shipyard will be building 25, or we will have 25 Evolved Cape Cast patrol boats. Some of them will also be operated by Australian Border Force. So there's a desire to standardise the hulls to gain sustainment and support efficiencies. We'll also continue to finalise the build of 6 of the 12 offshore patrol vessels that were originally contracted for acquisition by Lursen. So we're actually cutting 6 of those. And so it came as no surprise that our mine countermeasure program is being completely restructured within this integrated investment program. So some of those vessels were intended to be mine hunters. The autonomous and the countermeasure systems are still being acquired, but the way that it's going to be affected looks different. So I guess looking now, beyond the actual opportunities and what's happening and how defence in Australia is transforming and the capability flow on impacts that's happening. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about micro-partnering and the potential of working together to deliver on the promise of AUKUS and to deliver beyond the promise of AUKUS. So this really matters for US businesses and US capabilities and US technologies. So as I say here, contrary to some public analysis, which is probably more Australian-centric, our alliance with the US is becoming even more important to Australia. And I think Australia's alliance with the US is becoming more important to America as well. This is enabled still through the ANZUS Treaty. AUKUS is not a treaty, it's a technology sharing agreement. But these treaties will continue to grow and adapt. Australia has also enhanced its commitment to our partners in the Indo-Pacific as well. So it's recognised that we need to do a bit more work in that space. But this evolution requires a shift to more active Australian statecraft using all elements of national power, this greater advanced scientific and technological cooperation, which is extending to co-development, co-working and co-sustainment. Beyond the submarine rotational forces, we also have Marines rotating through Australia and a huge scale up in American-funded infrastructure in Northern Australia. And we're having further engagement and expanding the engagement on deterrence. And interestingly, expanding the conversation around AUKUS, although JAUKUS is absolutely off the table, as people are calling it, but expanding the conversation to how AUKUS can be a lead-in to close collaboration with allies like Japan, New Zealand, Canada, etc. Australia, however, remains very committed to sovereignty and maintaining sovereignty over industrial capabilities. And it's a nuance that maybe will be a learning curve for American professionals of any kind working in the AUKUS context with Australia. So some of you have seen, who are in the room, my white paper, Micro Partnerships in the Age of AUKUS. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I started thinking about it because we have this amazing partnership with an American firm called Vectech, who's been working in the surface warfare world for a long time now. And we've been able to demonstrate how co-working together can give our clients or our customers a 1 + 1 = 5 outcome by bringing together that local expertise and the global knowledge to give an outcome contextualized to a particular client's needs. I think that partnering with business, business to business partnerships really allow a scale up of trust, connection, leveraging of capability, expansion of market opportunity, which for those of us who are running businesses is absolutely key. It gives us the potential for really lowering the cost base. I mean, anyone who's worked, in exporting and had to deal with ITAR knows the cost overhead that imposes, as well as the security overhead. There's a real opportunity to share know-how as well, so that Australia can run faster. But because we have a smaller Navy and a different operating context, so there are things that we're doing in Australia that are more efficient. We have to make more with a lot less. So it forces a different approach that can be transferred and shared more broadly. And then, of course, it gives us the great potential to build on, a global knowledge base through partnering. I really believe that the true potential of AUKUS cannot be realised if small to mid-sized businesses and small to mid-sized businesses cannot transact across the Pacific. We need to be advocating to make sure that the legislative frameworks are fit for purpose for the global primes as well as for the small to medium businesses. So some of this we'll probably cover off in questions as well, but I just thought I just pop down where I think the really key opportunities for Australian American industry are to actually co-work together. So in the AUKUS context, there's a huge need to scale up infrastructure, and we just don't know what we don't know yet. And that infrastructure demand isn't just relating to AUKUS, because there's going to be the scale up need across the northern bases, the surface combatants, as I mentioned, and probably into civil infrastructure as well, to enable the logistics agenda that's pulled through in this integrated investment program. Learning nuclear stewardship, building submarine supply chains. I think that there's great potential for smaller business collaboration with respect to these startup, scale-up, advanced technologies. I'm actually really excited, and we've had an opportunity to talk to Tina about the potential in this space to bring, Australian, the US, and British companies together to maybe collaborate on a technology challenge, maybe looping in academia as well. Not everything has to be at the huge technology platform level. This can start small. And within AUKUS, this extraordinary potential to build a trilateral industrial base that brings more collective capability to the table and improves the resilience and self-reliance of all of our industrial bases together, particularly with respect to the submarine industrial base and the shipbuilding industrial bases. The GWEO, the Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance Enterprise opportunities, we're undertaking a call run process across maritime. As we rotate more American submarine capability through Australia, we're going to see collaborative maintenance. There's opportunities potentially in the future with respect to expeditionary maintenance in the surface fleet as exercise and joint capabilities evolve. And then, of course, we have these major upgrades and new builds in Adelaide and Western Australia from 2026. The undersea warfare more broadly is also an exciting space. So whilst Australia is committed to the extra large UUV program, we've also been testing the market with respect to reducing the processing load for the huge volumes of acoustic data that are now entering the system. Beyond the delivering to Australia, with the additional rotational forces that are moving into Australia, there's real opportunity to collaborate on delivering to the United States military, but within Australia, so that additional support, still bringing in local supply chains, but co-working globally to deliver a better outcome. And then we have the resilience and self-reliance agenda, and thinking through, in the worst of circumstances, what might we need to do together. And I've just got one or two more slides to go. So this slide is out of the white paper, which we will send an email link to the white paper and a few other little bits and pieces after we finish. But it's really a model thinking through how do we collectively move from being AUKUS blind to not just AUKUS enabled, but AUKUS leverage. And if we can't be co-working in a common security environment with a common export controls framework, with common technical data, common access to the relevant systems, AUKUS will be so much more limited. We are only going to be able to get to that point if we're working together, bringing global knowledge together with the local expertise and know-how. So just as Australians are going on a journey to understand how to work in the submarine industrial base and, the American supply chains, so too I'm observing American firms learning the nuances of the Australian legislative framework. Our work health and safety framework is a shock when individuals and businesses encounter it for the first time. Our mandated requirements for tendering, understanding requirements. So on, both sides of the transactions across the Pacific, it's a different lens, but it's fundamentally the same challenge that we need to work through. So what next? We work with a lot of businesses in Australia, scaling them up into the defence sector, as well as working globally. I think the first thing is to imagine what the possible is. AUKUS is really going to be a catalyst, I believe, and certainly at the highest levels of government believe is going to be a catalyst for so much more than what's on the table today. Doesn't mean that the technologies that are under Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are going to change, but to bring them to life, the policy and the legislative changes will be a catalyst, potentially around clean energy. Energy has certainly been a discussion, bringing other partners in. But I think it calls on us to be curious about the possibility of how we can work together to scale this up faster as well. There's the challenge for Australia to get the AUKUS skates on is quite extraordinary. I also think that having conversations like this and driving momentum are really key, and not just having them in our local communities and our local countries, but actually having them together in the AUKUS context. Partnering has been a core tenet of how Adroita operates. So seeking out partners to even just get started, whether it's an MOU or testing out a piece of work, because I don't think that we can wait for the legislation's moving, but it can't happen fast enough. And we've got to be able to work out how to co-deliver faster. And hopefully we'll be able to accelerate once the policies are in place. Starting with collaboration and moving to co-work, I think is really key. And then as always, the proof is in the pudding, proving that concept and getting just one piece of past performance of being taking a collaborative approach is really key. But I think the opportunities are really limitless, and I'm really keen for questions and discussion and to understand the audience's perspective today. I can't finish without sharing a little bit about Adroita as well. So we're a defence sector professional services firm, founded just under 8 years ago. It's our 8th birthday in May. And we've worked with both Australian and global businesses to grow revenue in the Australian defence and national security sectors. And we're really good at mobilising capability bottom up into the defence sector, particularly proven dual use technologies, heavy engineering. We kind of work across the spectrum of capabilities. But we also have another leg to the business where we work directly with defence and government in Australia. So we're naval specialists across engineering, project and program management, logistics, strategy advisory. And there's just a few points about how we actually help grow that capability base. And we've had amazing opportunities to partner here with a number of American businesses now and co-work on some really interesting opportunities. And with that, I'll finish. The QR code on the screen will take people to a copy of the white paper. You pass me. And also just a little capability statement for those who might be interested. So that's the white paper. I don't know how well that looks. And a little capability statement. And I've left my email address, so feel free to reach out. But again, we'll follow up with an email with the different documents attached. And on that note, questions, thoughts, and I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, I think we'll start in the room and then we'll trickle onto here. So go ahead.
Good, thank you. So let me congratulate you. I found that to be a really interesting brief. My colleagues and I have spent a little time doing what we could do through the web, and that's nothing in comparison to what you've given. I found it extremely interesting. And so that said, our organization has quasi-academic roots. It has very strong Navy ties, and most of us that work in this organization have Navy backgrounds in this. And we're aggressively involved with industry and interested in advanced technology. So 5 years ago, and we just celebrated our 5th birthday as an organization. So 5 years ago, we came in at the behest of Navy leadership to try to do some transformational work with the way that the Navy does its work in the sustainment enterprise, maintenance and modernization work. And as we got into that, we ran into a brick wall that we were not quite anticipating. And that is something you didn't mention at all. And I'm wondering what your comments might be about it. And that is the K-12 system and our career technical education work didn't generate people who had the interest or the skills or the desire to work in the maritime industry. You're probably familiar with the I don't know if you're aware of what happened at Sea, Air, and Space, but essentially the sustainment community and the shipbuilding community got taken to the cleaners by Navy leadership. And it was not pleasant to read. But a lot of that is going to come back to something we deal with on a daily basis, which is what we can do in grades 3, grades 5, grades 7, grades 12 to mature advanced technology interests, because we know what the Virginia class is going to look like in Block 8, and we've got a sense of what the Columbia class is going to look like when in 2040, when it's just, it jumps into, Block 2. We have a sense of what those technologies are going to be like and the complexity of them. Question is, how are those kids who are now, the kids who are likely to grow up to be adults who can do that kind of work in 2040 and 50, they're now in 3rd grade. So what do we do to incentivize them to do it? That's something.
It's such a prickly question. So can you just share your name again?
I'm sorry, Alan Baker, and my colleagues here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So I'll touch on a couple of things. Firstly, I'll touch on the skilling and, that STEM interest really in getting the right education at the right time. And then I'll also share just a little bit of context about the sustainment transformation that's underway in Australia as well. So firstly, creating the mariners as well as the sustainers and the shipbuilders of the future, I think there's an equal challenge in Australia as it is here in the US. However, we've probably got one more challenge in that we have had such a boom and bust cycle in shipbuilding. We built amazing capability in Australia when we built the air warfare destroyers. They were considered a bit of a dog in terms of, the project for a long time. Because it was the first of its class. We had never integrated the level of complexity of systems in Australia before. But by ship 3, the program was humming, but we only built 3. And then that workforce, much of that shipbuilding workforce has sort of dispersed throughout Adelaide. So not only are we not generating the throughput, but we didn't find a way to effectively maintain that shipbuilding capability in Australia. And that was also a feature of the Anzac class program. And then before that, it was a feature of Collins class build. So part of the bigger agenda is not only the reason why every vessel that Australia is acquiring appears at face value to be a very high per unit cost is because we're not just building a platform, we're building a sovereign shipbuilding capability that envisages in the future potentially sovereign design capability. So our sovereign defence industrial development our defence industry development strategy has a number of priorities for sovereign capability in Australia. It is essential to have this. Within shipbuilding, there are a couple of subsets that Australia wants to grow the capability in over the next 4 to 5 years. One of them is actually test evaluation, certification, systems assurance. So building more. So if we're going to do sovereign combat system design, we need to get a bit better at how we test and assure ourselves. Yep. But there are other elements to that as well. So that's trying to sort of solve that boom and bust cycle. And that's applying across submarines, minor war vessels, and surface combatants. But in terms of that workforce of the future and the demand, we talk in Australia about how the submarine enterprise needs an extra 20,000 Australians participating by 2040. That is a drop in the ocean compared to the broader tech sector demand, which is 640,000 new tech sector workers are needed by 2030. So it's not just our industries that are competing for this capability. I don't think we've solved this problem in Australia because we're actually seeing a decline in the quality of STEM education against OECD standards. But I agree that it starts in what we call primary school. What's the
School,
yeah,
elementary school.
Elementary school, primary school. So for us, kindergarten to grade 6. But that critical time is year 3, 4, 5. And my sense is teachers at that stage aren't being fully equipped with the capability to imbue a sense of excitement and wonder about maths and science, as opposed to just doing the rote learning. Actually, in Australia, we have this really cool initiative that I've been involved in called Subs in Schools. So the Submarine Institute and a number of donors provide funding to create a national challenge, and it's modelled on the F1 in schools to create a submarine design. So school kids form up in a team and they get allocated mentors, and then they have a design challenge and they create, small submarines. And having judged some of these and some of the Formula One in schools, but what they create is amazing for school kids. Some of it's, university standard of project management. So it's also finding other more creative ways to communicate the joy and the interest and the excitement of working in these kind of industries.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd love to. And then in terms of the sustainment piece, Australia's been going through a consolidation and a transformation of sustainment, maritime sustainment. So we've had what's called Plan Galileo. And rather than having each asset platform, so the Anzac class, the destroyers, managing their own sustainment enterprise. We've been moving over the last 4 years to a regional maintenance concept. So analogous to the United States Navy regional maintenance, but, you know, not at the scale. We're also having difficulty getting the level of capability into our sailors for intermediate maintenance. It's partly because of different crewing concepts in Australia and workforce challenges. And I would say in terms of the sustainment cycle, my observation is we outsource more to industry. So we outsource more in terms of those shorter maintenance activities. We're not just outsourcing depot level maintenance. And, you know, so getting also the organic maintenance and the, you know, onboard sailor-led maintenance cycles, right, is a really big challenge for us. But some of the efficiencies that Australia is gaining from delivering maintenance and getting more bang for buck out of our programs is definitely of potential interest to the US Navy as well, because we have to do more with less.
So Sarah, on that note, I was just going to add, because Bill Newton from Phoenix Group had I think you pretty much hit on it, but he asked a question of, we do things like maintenance on ships, but the methods differ to get to the same result. And he asked for any thoughts, comments on opportunities to take similarity to commonality. And I think you kind of hit on some of those too, but I didn't know if there's.
Yeah, no, I think just probably one more point is we're hearing, so we've moved towards concepts of interoperability. And I think, you know, our Collins class submarines have had a very high level of interoperability with American submarine for a long time. We have recently demonstrated cooperative engagement capabilities, say with the Aegis combat system. But now there's conversation is shifting to this concept of interchangeability. And my sense is that there's an evolution in thinking underway at the moment about if we are facing a common challenge in the future, how do we get better at standardizing what we can in order to be able to co-sustain? And that those words around co-development, co-delivery, co-sustainment are actually in our National Defence Strategy document. And I've heard those same words coming from admirals and the Secretary of Navy and other folk within the naval enterprise here in the US, in industry as well. So this message that is coming through that it's beyond, we've got to find ways to be able to work together more effectively, particularly in the event of the worst of circumstances.
My name is James Amico. I'm from Impress Technologies. We're a small business hub zone here in the United States. We've done about 20 years of integration with the federal government. And, you know, I want to second what he said. You know, I've been following AUKUS for since basically 2020 now. And this has been one of the more informative panels that I've been to. And, you know, kind of from a small business aspect, I went to see her in space and, you know, asking questions. How do I get involved? How do we, because we have been fortunate to be able to work with the Navy at a program level. We've done the enterprise solutions for our Zone class destroyers, as well as many other program level integrations. So for us, and I'll be honest, you know, you have your big integrators here in the United States, and that's great, but it's going to be all hands on deck. You're going to need all small businesses here because logistically going into the Pacific is tough in itself.
Yeah.
Not only that, but bringing our assets together. Right now, the United States since 2019, we're trying to catch up building our own Virginia class submarines. So the reality is you're going to need everyone to build your Virginia classes.
Absolutely.
Plus your base. So I just want to, you know, kind of make a statement and also say, you know, remember us little guys, because we're here and we want to make sure we're involved from every.
I mean, that's absolutely why I wrote this white paper, because small to medium enterprises are the economic engine of Australia, the US and the UK. They employ millions of people in all three nations. And actually, in my view, SMEs, what we call SMEs, are the grassroots innovators as well, because, you know, when you're a smaller business, particularly in those early scale-up stages, it's do or die. You have to work out, you know, by your nature, you have to be innovative in order to survive and grow and evolve. And also you don't have some of the other features of much bigger businesses in terms of decision making and so on. So I completely agree. The promise of AUKUS cannot be delivered if small to medium businesses cannot co-work. And if the policy and the regulatory frameworks aren't established to allow that, then I don't see how we can deliver on what AUKUS intends. And if we even look at Pillar 2, with those advanced technologies that are intended, many of those technological innovations are happening in you know, early stage research or at sort of TRL 1 to 3, and you know, they're actually growing into that sort of startup scale up space. So their innovations too are really intended to be brought to the table. But I think it's beyond those businesses. It's the sustainers, it's the mum and pop shops, and to be losing capability at this time when there's such an urgent sort of call to action would be really tragic, I think.
Sarah, Jeff Craig, PQI Solutions. I'm interested, so actually that was a great point. I completely agree with you. I think the large businesses have the experts in ITAR and FMS and all the other requirements, and of course I know a lot of that's evolving and focusing. But one thing I didn't hear you say, and I'm kind of curious about, is service of forces agreement. And do you see that playing into, you know, the whole how the US in this case would be supporting Australia? I don't know if the potential go back and forth.
So I don't know enough about that to comment. But what I would say is that across, you know, actually I took a few notes down before I was speaking today. And, you know, so I mentioned sort of specific capability types where I think there are opportunities, but I also think the opportunities extend well beyond, you know, Australian manufacturers exporting widget A, B, or C to the US. So these frameworks also need to be created to enable effective OEM support, to enable the effective delivery of services at all levels of the supply chain. But I don't know enough specifically about that agreement to be able to, you know, give an informed comment.
Yeah, I think, I mean, kind of a follow on that. It's just, as we're looking as a company, small business of, okay, we're supporting the US, and there's some component tied into Australia. What does that look like? But there's also the element of, because that ties into, do we as a corporation somehow have to follow Australian tax law, for example? Things like that, which become very complicated.
It's super
Larger businesses end up having subsidiaries and things like that, whereas for small businesses, it's just not really practical.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're kind of navigating the same thing in the reverse direction. So we're considering incorporating here in the US. We haven't made a decision, but we are considering it because of the things like the tax complexity. But there are other key enablers, you know, something like you know, we operate, you know, in the intelligence set sharing community very effectively with under the banner of Five Eyes. So maybe some kind of AUKUS security clearance recognition, and AUKUS visa is on the table, or there's certainly discussion about that. But there are other barriers that relate to elements that are not within the DoD or Department of State swim lane, that more sit in the tax or other business legislation. So I don't think we're collectively there yet in working out how these elements need to be addressed. But I think there's going to need to be some changes, you know, to enable it to be fully effective.
My name's Waylon Grant. I'm with a company called Gordon Hatchell and Associates, but I'm probably the senior guy here that came out of college and got a job at Newport News Shipbuilding. And the whole structure of our government Navy at that time was Cold War. We went through the buildup of Cold War, nuclear submarines, Enterprise, 637 class. I've seen every one of them, been in every one, and I just sort of take you a little bit further. Every shipyard at that time, 8 naval shipyards were self-sufficient in everything they did. But learned they were after World War II, everybody had to be self-sufficient. It had its own paint plants. It trained its own people. It had a prep school. It had people. And then when you went to work for it, you went and you were trained not only as a regular person, but you were trained in nuclear, radiological control. No questions asked. You either passed or you were gone.
Yep.
Came to work, you worked. I came out of that era. I was trained by the recovery group.
Yeah.
I transitioned to the U.S. Navy. I did private industry, then went to U.S. Navy, worked in Norfolk Naval Shipyard, ended up heading corrosion control, all naval shipyard and nuclear reactors. We learned every class of ship. Norfolk Naval Shipyard worked on everything from sailboats to nuclear carriers. We were cross-trained in everything. No questions asked. So we knew from every group and some of the work that we were able to do and made it transfer so easy from David Taylor Naval Research and the ONR. Every naval shipyard had their specialists. It was all transferred. We had Subic Bay in the Philippines that we supported. In 1 year, we worked on 97 vessels on time, on schedule, and under budget.
Wow.
I happened to be a technology transfer chief of naval Khmer fellow. It was one of 12 people. We were those people. It was all, the whole organization was tilted on that. Then it went to commercial off-the-shelf closing shipyards.
Yep.
We have been downgraded to 3 shipyards, commercial shipyards, nothing can get built. It gets built, but anyway. So what do? Your model is brilliant. You've got to take those lessons. There are some people like us around that know how to restart that.
I totally, I think,
And it's not many of us.
yeah.
And somebody better grab us really quick. Because we're going, dying.
We need all that knowledge to be filtering through to
And
it.
I did a startup, I've been through, and I've done work in other areas.
Yeah.
State Department, ITAR, patents, Pax River. I mean, I've lived across a lot of stuff. I'm not rich. I paid for it because of the barrier to entries.
Yes. Yes, it's a costly business to do business in, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And we were trained, and I'm going to say this, and there's a lot of other people, we were trained to deliver quality, protect the warfighter. And we had the ability to stop something that was going wrong that we knew would kill somebody.
Yeah.
And I still have that passion. I'm here to help. And I'm glad to see it somebody else that thinks like we used to think. And our mentors, admirals, and all our group of people that work together, because they were brilliant.
Cannot succeed if we're not sharing knowledge. We cannot achieve this. I mean, that's why we've been back here 3 times in the last 12 months, is to learn as much as we can. Within the limitations as well that we still have. We might hold reasonably high security clearances, but we're certainly still working through
It's just, it's a small business. You get an SBIR, trying to get a contract, and then you have to spend $300,000 to just handle the accounting program.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And then to go to ITAR and go through the arguments on ITAR to be told, well, we don't know.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, yes, but you're on the right track. If you can ergonomically grow it within house, start it, build it, bring it, and move faster, quicker, because it can't be done here right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your thoughts.
So I'm gonna ask sort of a level setting question here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And I think just to manage expectations and opportunities.
yeah.
So just to kind of put it on the table, so are you all coming from Australian DoD as a consultant representation? Are you looking to create matchmaking partnerships? Like what constitutes success for you all so we can understand how you're looking to engage, and then that really defines some of the opportunities for.
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. So we have a couple of objectives, you know, when we're thinking about the US. So the first is we need to scale up Australian capability, and we have a model of co-working on projects that's been effective. So we're looking to partner or support through advice and, you know, tendering support, whatever, you know, there's a bunch, you know, list of different things on here, but actually provide that as a service to firms that are looking at how can I support Australia with growing any of these elements within the AUKUS pillars or beyond the AUKUS pillars. The second thing that we're looking at, so, and I think there's probably a special piece in there that I don't see that the solution long-term is to just pick up capability and dump it in Australia and then exit. This actually needs to transfer knowledge and capability into Australian mines and into Australian infrastructure and the manufacturing base. So bringing that expertise together so that co-delivering is actually our top priority. The second is that there are capabilities in the Australian industrial base that have the potential to contribute to the industrial base here in the US. And so we're working with firms to look at those bilateral transactions. And then the professional services leg, we're looking at opportunities to actually work within probably some of the service combatant supply chains here in the US in the longer term to expand the capabilities that are available to both the US and Australia. Yeah, through partnerships. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else in the room? So I don't know, Sarah, if you can see this, but Nancy Gurdon, unfortunately, I think she had to drop, but so she's our Hampton Roads Executive Director. She left her information up there, but I didn't know this. So she said up there, kind of that top comment was that it was just announced that the Australian company QMS is coming here and establishing a location here for Australian shipbuilders. And they're going to start in the Hampton Roads area. And you may have just learned this talking to the Hampton Roads Alliance folks. Yes. She did mention that too. So, and then she talks a little bit about, you know, the Senator Kane and Warner and their support for kind of building that industrial workforce here locally. So I just wanted to mention that for those that can't see that us in person. But yeah. Well, I think this is perfect because it's 3:24 and I like to end these on time, but those of us in the room, we don't need to run off. We have the room for a little while, but I did want to thank everyone that is virtual, and we do, so just kind of in closing, you know, Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge, we host a lot of events. Really the best way to find us is on LinkedIn, and we had, and you'll get this presentation, so you'll have all these links, but we do have our big small business workshop coming up on April 30th. Our in-person is almost full. So if you do want to come in person, I'd highly recommend you get registered. You can use the link or scan the QR code. There is a short survey. Would love for you to take just to give a, you know, a little bit of feedback. It won't take you more than 30 seconds to take that. So that's there. And, you know, connecting with us on LinkedIn. I really want to thank Sarah and Mark. I mean, you're from Australia, but you're here in Norfolk, so we had to take advantage of this opportunity and just a wealth of knowledge. And I know I've enjoyed getting to know you and work with you over the last year. So thank you for your time. And any closing remarks before we officially sign off?
Again, I just want to say thank you, all of you, for taking the time to, you know, hear an Aussie's thoughts on how to make the most out of AUKUS. And, you know, this, and it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to be here today. So thank you. Thank you for taking time out of today to come and spend some time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.